President Peter, fellow Rotarians, it is indeed my pleasure to introduce Rob McBride. The McBride family have been pastoralists for 97 years and are the third largest wool producers in the world. And Rob is the fifth generation McBride wool producer. He is passionate about the land. His property covers 500,000 acres in Western New South Wales and is in fact the largest property in New South Wales. But Rob is also a man who has done just about everything, from working in banking and finance both in Australia and the UK for years, to mustering wild goats on his stations. The millions of wild goats are actually another story. He is actively involved in Scouts as a leader, and he also has a wicked sense of humour. Rotarians, Rob McBride.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. If I move around a bit, please just feel free to ask me questions. I guess what I'd like to do today is give you a bit of an insight into the past of agriculture and where we are today, because I do believe that we're in the most precarious position in Australia's history. We are being sold out very, very quickly, and unless the city people understand this, how quickly it's happening, I believe 20% of New Zealand's already sold out to the Chinese. So I'm not having a go to race the people, I'm just merely saying your future is in your own hands, and it's still in our hands for the next 3 to 5 years. But if I may, I'll just touch on a few little bits and pieces as far as my background's concerned and my sheep station. I guess Tolarno Station's my sheep station. I run about 500,000 acres in the Western Division of New South Wales. Now, in its heyday, it was just over 1 million acres. And there's a couple of little bits of interesting stories other than our staff members are Kelpies. They're pretty good drivers. Walton Matilda, Burke and Wills, the Australian Labor Party have the same 3 locations that they kind of went through and came from. And that's my sheep station. So if I may, I'll just give you a little bit of background on the Western Division of New South Wales, because that is effectively been the breadbasket of Adelaide. And people kind of forget Ross Trevor College was the Reeds in 1851. When the Reeds got going, that was their sheep station, and they were making about $20 million a year out of wool. You have to remember, it wasn't until 1945 that there was tax on wool, and that's why all the farmers were pretty successful, kept exceptionally good records, because at that particular point in time it was about 45% of our exports. So just in the early days, from about 1838 to about 1851, the Western Division of New South Wales was no man's land. It was kind of, selectors would come up the riverways and get to that region, and the Bartinji tribe was the Aboriginal tribe in our area, and they kind of killed a fair few selectors as time progressed. And then in 1851, Tolarno got going under the auspice of about 1,100,000 acres. Burke and Wills stayed there in the 1860s. Now, people kind of have to forget a little bit about our history. If I may, I'll just hit the next slide, I hope, with John's help. Right arrow. Sorry, I apologise, John. Sorry about this. Always technology. So, I'd love to tell you a little bit of history of this Australia, because it's quite intriguing. When Burke and Wills came through our property in 1860, they were looking for this inland sea. Now, what was intriguing, I'm Irish descent, so I don't mind giving the Irish a bit of a hard time, but conceivably, Burke and Wills, their last great party was actually at our sheep station in 1860. It wasn't actually at Menindee. What you need to know about your forebears was quite intriguing. Was you had Captain Charles Sturt in 1844 opening up, leaving from Adelaide, going up all through this country, looking for the inland sea, which he never found. He found the Murrumbidgee. He was the first man to go up and down the the Murray River, and was instrumental in giving a bit of power to the Governor of New South Wales at the time, Darling, giving him the name of the river, which I've lived on for about 25 years of my life. So the expedition, as you said, ill-fated at the end of the day, but as I said, Burke and Wills came through our area in 1860. Next little period of time was relatively peaceful until the Waltzing Matildas saga got going. Now, Australians kind of sing along to the once a jolly swagman camping to the billabong. Hang on. But where does it come from? It actually comes from my station. It was a shearers' strike of 1894. The price of wool had gone down, and effectively the owners of Tolarno said to the shearers of Tolarno, we're going to drop your rates. Shearers of Tolarno weren't that thrilled with the whole idea, and hence a shearing war actually broke out in 1894. The story about Waltzing Matilda and how that is anything to do with me. On the 26th of August 1894, the owners of Tolarno sent one of our paddle boat steamers down from Arlington Woods down to to Wentworth, to pick up 50 non-union shearers. Now, on the way back, the ship was set alight. Nobody was killed that night, but it was set alight and sent down the riverways. Now, that was a pretty personal insult to me. As owner of Tolarno at that time, we had the largest paddle boat steamer fleet on inland waterways in the southern hemisphere. We were making millions of dollars, and you've just destroyed my riverboat. I take that as a bit of a personal affront. They caught 6 of the shearers, took them to Broken Hill. Now, you've got to understand that there was 2 totally different worlds. There was outback New South Wales, where if you came and worked on my sheep station, whatever I paid you, you needed tobacco, you needed coffee, you needed alcohol. Now, guess what was coming up on my riverboats? And you wanted to go into the pub. Who owned the pub? Effectively, it was a perfect system. And then you had this place called Broken Hill. It was 200 k's that way, and the unionists controlled that. And what was intriguing is Australians forget that New South Wales, in an attempt to stop the Welsh miners, they actually banned into New South Wales a number of the union leaders that would have come from Wales. So what they landed in Adelaide, came up to Coburn, and walked from Coburn up to Broken Hill, which is about 100 kilometres. There was said to be 40,000 Broken Hillites came down one time to escort one of the leaders into Broken Hill. So you had to see this major standoff: perfect socialism, to a degree, and perfect capitalism. And that's why when they took the 6 of them to Broken Hill, Sylvia just kind of destroyed my riverboat. I'm taking them. They were acquitted in Broken Hill. 2 days later, one of the guys by the name of McLean got shot dead. He was one of the 6. But what started happening then, and Samuel Hofmeister at Dagwood Woolshed, you'd all heard of Dagwood Woolshed, Samuel Hofmeister was one of the shearers, and he heard what they were doing now was setting woolsheds alight. So unionists would go up to my shearing shed and say, hey, we're in charge, not you, and set woolsheds alight. Supposedly, Samuel Hofmeister set Dagwood Woolshed alight. With great remorse, it was found that he had a bullet in his head the next morning. So he's the jolly swagman. And effectively, it was a case of, he was jolly swagman, up come the troopers 1, 2, 3. The government in Australia was going to finally protect my interest. And I gave this talk one time in Broken Hill, and it was quite intriguing. One of the gentlemen came up to me and he said, "You've pieced the history together pretty well, Robert." And I said, "I'm trying to." He said, "My grandfather was one of the 6. He said what he did was set a woolshed coming down the river. He set a woolshed alight, and funny enough, they took him to Lillooquin in New South Wales this time. He got 10 years hard labour. Only job he could get was back in the mines in Broken Hill. Worked in there for 2 years, got over seaman and died. But there you go, gentlemen and ladies. You now know the story of your country about the whole Waltzing Matilda story, and it actually started at Tolarno Station. Following on from that, the same event was this little group called the Australian Labor Party got going on the banks of Tolarno River at my station, so it's all my fault. No, please. Yep, please, by all means. Thanks, John. Other little bits and pieces. That homestead we still live in, it's over an acre of roof. Tolarno got down to about 250,000 acres when I bought it back in 1994. It had been in the family to some degree, but I was one of 6 children and 26 grandkids that we bought out, and we kind of went up there and lived up there for about 10 or 12 years. We love Tolarno Station. I've now doubled the size of the property up to 500,000 acres, and as Sylvia said, I think we're the largest private husband-wife combination as landholders in New South Wales. Pretty proud of that. I spend most of my time up there, but with no education and no roads and no Telstra and no infrastructure in the bush, you want to bring your kids up properly. So as my son goes as 6th generation PAC, as Mr Walker's son and I went to PAC many, many years ago. We love that particular school. So if we can jump on to the next one. Thank you very much, John. As I said, it was just about the exploration and where Birken Wheels went. People kind of very quickly forgot they had the perfect season. and they were very lucky because they had perfect seasons. If anybody else, as you know, they sold about 2/3 of their possessions going across in our region. But as I said, sorry, I've jumped around a little bit, but your little Waltzing Matilda gentleman came from Samuel Hofmeister at Dagwood Woolshed. So if we can jump on, sorry, jump on. Paddle-based steamers and wool, it's still our lifeblood. Riverboats to get to Goolwa, people kind of forgot. Wentworth was the third largest port in Australia in the 1870s, third largest port. It was only at the last minute Canberra was decided to become the nation's capital rather than Wentworth, and Wentworth was should have been the capital because everything went down the Murray and the Darling, conceivably. We still use the old board where Waltzing Matilda came from. It was a shearing strike. The shearers at the time did throw all the hand pieces. In those days, hand pieces were owned by the station. So we found about 2,000 hand pieces under the boards because they just said, hey, we're out of here and we'll leave your gear where it doesn't need to be. But we're still very proud. Australia exports 85% of the wool to China at the moment, which is a great concern. The Michelle family of Magic, they started in the 1870s. We try and put as much wool still through the scouring plants at Salisbury. And people kind of forget the cost of everything in China has jumped up very, very quickly. So apparently I was speaking to Peter, Michelle, last week or so, and it's pretty much line wool now, and in fact you can probably scour wool, which is taking all the lanolin and everything out of the wool. You can do it cheaper here than in China. So it's all about everything being better in China. It certainly isn't. It really is an interesting country, but I'll kind of talk about that a little bit later on, mate. Sheep are our livelihood. Sorry, jump across. Sheep are our livelihood. Cattle, and also, if we can keep on going, up to wild goats. Sylvia talked about it. Well, that's sheep. They're goats. That's kept 80% of the Western Division landholders in the last 30 years. There's one thing that kept us alive, and that's goats. Our sheep were in peril. Oh, that's a sheepdog. Even I know that. I'm Irish, but like, the colour gave it away. But with the goats, there's 6.5 million goats running wild in the Western Division of New South Wales. So we do it with our own little planes or gyroplaners. We'll get these goats into the yards. 15, 20 years ago, we had Tiananmen Square guns. I've got a few of those, but it's like a 303, but the rifling means that if you aim there, you shoot there, but with large number of goats, it was a way of getting rid of them. Today, they're worth about $60 each. So it is the lifeblood. We kind of get about 40,000 goats off a year off our property. So all the smaller ones released back onto the property. We still run sheep and cattle. Goats, as I said, there's 6.5 million running wild in the Western Division of New South Wales. In South Australia, your government sees it somewhat different. So you as taxpayers are paying about $45 a head to get them shot out of the air in the Flinders Ranges. Now that's a $110 turnaround. If you put $110 on 6.5 million, you're making a few mistakes here. But that's again, I've tried to work with the South Australian government because they kind of say they're feral. No, they're not feral, they're Australian bush goat. It's a marketing angle, okay? It's just a marketing angle. So sheepdogs are our backbone as much as our men. We try and give our staff the best we possibly can, but Australia underestimates the humble kelpie. They've kept us going for a long time. They're amazing animals, and you can use them on goats, sheep, cattle. They're very, very adaptable to their environment. So the outback is under peril, and I guess we got 500,000 acres, but where to at the moment? The Chinese are buying up our country, and it is at an alarming rate. Please, gentlemen and ladies, do understand. I was in China a couple of years ago, and 25% of the arable land of China has been destroyed since the Cultural Revolution in 1949. So they've destroyed their landscape. They're on the move. Now, there's only 3 dumb countries, and I'm not being rude. The Kiwis, we'll pick on them because they're dumb. Central Africa and also Australia. We are allowing huge land ownership. The Australian government says, things are under control. There's nothing under control. I'm chairman of the Australian Wool Growers Association of Australia. I go to a number of meetings in Sydney. At a table of 12, every time I go there now, there's another one of us who've sold out for $20 million. And you can't really blame them. And I guess I don't want to see a sunset, that's a sunrise, but you look at the Kidman family and, you know, the largest cattle stations in the world potentially up for sale here. And it's a travesty. Now, do you blame the Kidmans? Certainly not in the slightest. And because they're a public company, I can espouse a few of their numbers, but last year they turned over 80,000 head of cattle and lost $1 million. Now that is just the middlemen screwing us totally. Literally Coles, Woolies and the abattoirs are destroying us. I'll pick on a Kidman property. I'll say it costs about $150 to get it down to town, roughly, a head of a moo cow. And the skin and the offal we get paid nothing for. That's another $150. So basically, at the end of the day, to move a cow and pay for a whole 500 kilo moo cow probably is getting somewhere about $1 a kilo, maybe less. In the Green Paper, our beloved Agricultural Minister, in his Green Paper, he noted that in 1900, producers were getting 90% of the value of the product. Today we get less than 10%. There is no point, and I guess I won't have a pick on Kidman, I'll pick on the McBride family. We were large landholders in South Australia, but the return on capital is non-existent. Unless we passionately love our industry, and that's all good and well and good, but effectively the Chinese are coming in and offering stupid amounts of money because the middlemen are killing us. And I'm, again, not having a go, but I get asked all the time by businessmen from overseas, I'll put it that way, I want this property, this property, this property, go find it for me. And I'm a pro-Australian and go find yourself. I love the takeaway, but that's where it ends. Effectively, we're under siege, and our Australian government has to stop changes of ownership. It is so easy to change lands to different entities, to different countries. And people say, it's all happened before, Robert. The Americans came, the English came, everybody's come and gone. Yes, they did, but they came for profit. Today, it's all about food security, and that is where I spoke to a gentleman recently who's pretty high up with the people to do in China. And the central government, they've got a 10-year term, central government. The next 10 years, they're looking to build buildings to house another 400 million people. That's their plan. Now, if you've got 400 million people, you've destroyed 25% of your arable land, 70% of the world's seas are destroyed. Where can you get it? You can get it from sucker nations who are stupid enough to sell their soul. You can't blame the farmers of Australia. We've been totally destroyed by the middle industries, and we've just got to help. And I won't pick on banks, but banks have done irreparable damage to Australia. You've got 150 years of experience here, standing here. I'm not picking on banks to me, but just a lot of Australians getting crucified at the moment by banks. You've got a wealth of experience. The Chinese are not going to be able to understand our country. It's a hard country. It really does need time to understand the simplicities of our nation, and that's really not being undertaken at the moment. Very quickly, that's my wife. I'm also lucky enough to have 2 kids. If you ever Google our station, and please by all means come up to our station, again, picking on Mr. Walker's son, Alistair's been in the Variety Club Bash for I think 10 or 15 years. We get the Variety Club Bash there, going up there pretty regularly. We've also got a Rotary group coming up in the next few months. We're the most urbanised nation on the planet. 80% of our population lives in 4 cities. We don't know anything about our culture and our history. It's out there, and we've got to get Australians to understand that. So if you can get the next generation to come to our stations and see their nation. They watch McLeod's Daughters and they think they know about their country. They don't. It is a tragedy. We are under siege, and realistically, in any way you can, start the ball rolling. The Kidman issue needs to be addressed. We cannot have it sold out to foreigners. So I'm trying to get Australians to look at buying their own house back. Because once it's gone, it will never be up for sale again. And once it's gone, with a free trade agreement, the government's pretty proud of the free trade agreement. We've got a free trade agreement in China. So I'm just a dumb farmer, but if I've got a free trade agreement, they own the land, they grow what they want to, they take everything off the land. How do my family in Australia win out of that? I'm, again, not being anti-anybody, I'm just being pro-Australian. I'll keep going. The Darling River's been kind of destroyed by the cotton industry, all those in cotton, boo. The 7th largest catchment on the planet is the Murray-Darling Basin. The only place on the world where cotton went to the top of the catchment to steal the water is Australia. The governments of Australia need to nationalise this. It's not a state issue. At the moment, Menindee Lakes, I'll pick on Menindee Lakes, when the water's at that level, it's South Australia. If it goes an inch more, it's New South Wales water. This year alone, with the Darling almost dry, I've walked across the Darling 3 times in my life, and it's not a very nice experience. I'm a long way from the guy upstairs and I walk on water. It's been destroyed, and it's all because cotton's gone to our top of our catchment and stolen all the water. And all the politicians are saying, we don't know why there's no water in the Darling. Well, it's basically my hand. If you cut off my fingers and put levee banks up there, up around Burke, and you find water, it's like, wow. The cotton industry's gone, wow, I found water. It doesn't go in the Darling anymore, but we found water, and they've gotten away with it. Look at Cubby Station. You, as taxpayers, sold out a property that's probably worth $3 million. They probably put about 40 million in, a lot of infrastructure, $400 million. You paid to silly, unsustainable people who sold it to the government for a song and left the water in Cubby Station, which the Chinese now own. This thing's going to die very, very quickly. Broken Hill's got about 4 months' supply of water left, and we joked with Sir Eric, who lived up in Broken Hill for 9 years. That was one of my closest towns. This thing's dying. And when your riverways die, you die, because it's an amazing ecosystem. It's one of the most amazing in the world, and we just kind of let it go, I'm afraid. Just very quickly, please, you are welcome and all and sundry, and please do come up and experience. This is our homestead. If you ever watch Where the Bloody Hell Are You commercial on TV, or you know that commercial that was on TV, at the 1 minute mark, we're there. It was quite funny. We were having a few beers. It was Friday afternoon, and one of the staff members said, "They said, hey you, whose dog's that?" And they said, "Me." And they said, "Do you want to be in the commercial?" The guy said, "Yeah." So I gave him my hat, and he's standing. If you ever watch it, he's standing on the veranda there, and we called the dog up about 40 times. And the dog said, "Look, you know, how many times you open?" So the dog, it was a hot day, the dog just said, "Oh, I'm out of here." And the guy kept on standing there, and the producer said, "Oh, get him to come up again." "No, not coming up." And but what was funny, we were here on a little fence, it was Friday afternoon, we were having a few beers, and the gentleman who was in charge said, "This is a set for TV and radio, you can't drink." And we said, "Okay, we'll drink this time. Next time you come back, we won't." So, but all good fun. But yeah, please, if you get a chance, come to Tolarno. There's 7 resident ghosts, but that's another story here at Tolarno. If next little...
That's the last one.
That's the last one.
Yep.
Please, I don't know how I'm going for time.
You're on time.
It is the most brilliant nation in the world. You, ladies and gentlemen, put back, and that's the important thing, through Rotary, through me, through Lifetime and Scouts wearing silly uniforms in front of kids. I've always said to the parents, you take my picture, I kill you. But you give back to society. And our society is under siege. Our country is under siege. So please, any way you can, keep it in our hands and push politicians to make sure, you know, our Prime Minister says, "Oh, look, you know, it's all under control now." I see guys who are 5th generation farmers selling out all the time. They take the money and run, it's easy. And life isn't about easy, and our forebears came here. It wasn't about easy, it's about putting in a commitment. And you, ladies and gentlemen, do it to your community. Farmers do it to Australia. With the Kidman issues, it really is, make sure it stays in Australian hands, because if we lose it, it will never come back. It's not like ever before. The biggest food grab on the planet is happening, and we're at the centre of it, and it's happening daily, and it's terrifying. But again, Sylvia, very kindly, we met a number of years ago, and she's been looking after me and everybody else. It was a pleasure to meet all and sundry. You've all looked after me very, very well today. Please ask me any questions. I've jumped around a little bit, haven't used overheads as much as I could, but please, proud to be here, so thank you very much.
Most interesting talk, thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Have the changes in the FIRB, Foreign Investment Review Board, I think about $317 million down to about $15 million for primary production land. Has that changed the picture very much?
Thank you, sir. Good question. Unfortunately not. And I'll give you an example. I'm not being rude. I spoke to one of the gentlemen who is a friend of mine, and he sold out for $20 million the other week. I said, "How's that going?" And he said, "Oh, well, my family came here in the 1850s. There's a dam on the front yard. There's a little blow-up inflatable. Mr. Wong is dancing around in his little inflatable. And I'm not having a go, I'm not being rude, but I can imagine what his forebears, who 5 generations ago." So to answer the question, unfortunately, the system you can get through, you can walk through it. It is so what I propose is to put a 50-year lease on every purchase, every transfer that happens in Australia now, put a 50-year maximum lease, and then let the next generations of Australians sort it out, because so much is happening. There's a couple of big landholders in South Australia who are said to be owned by foreign-owned consortiums. Another example of gentlemen who have sold out have hundreds of millions of dollars in their back pocket. Gentlemen on the Australian Wool Innovations Board, who I know very well. If you have a meeting in China, which you do, there's always a Communist Party official at every meeting. Wherever I went, there's some lady or gentleman sitting down at the meetings. In Australia, we should, if you come to a meeting about business and you have Chinese money in your back pocket, you should acknowledge that and tell us that that is a situation, and therefore your best interests and those of the consumers may well be, and our nation may well be different. But that's what scares me the most, is that these people generally have sold out. It's like, here's some money back here. And again, I get approached pretty regularly. I'm high up in the Communist Party official. I've got $400 million. I want to do this, this and this. Go home and we'll sell it to you. The product, not the land. And I'm not being rude, but that's the type of situation we find ourselves in. Sorry, long-winded answer. Sorry.
Rosie, you had a question?
Yes, I was just thinking, do you ever actually investigate what's underneath the soil, drilling for, you might be sitting on a gold mine?
Effectively, very good question. The reason why Tolarno is 1851 is that's why we got going, because that's when Western Lands Lease came into force. So Western Lands Lease, you have 100 years and 100 years. So I've got about another 190 years, so I reckon it might see me out. But it was because of gold rush in 1849, gold rush in California. So when the Western Lands Leases got set up, effectively the Queen of England said, well, anything under the ground's mine. So as a farmer in Australia, I have the top 2 inches of the land. Now, to answer your question, we have BMAX and Aluka mining our property. And we're basically, our little station's the end of the inland sea. About 500 million years ago, you're basically on the beach. So effectively, from our place to Oyen, which is about 250 k's down the road, Rumulite sand, which is on our property, is going to be worth about $500 billion industry in our region. 500 billion, not million. Large uranium deposits and everything else. I did economics accounting at Adelaide Uni. I went to PAC. I love sheep, but I'm not a Kiwi. It is long-term, and it's about keeping land in Australian hands. So we've got a few test sites by Aluka and BMAX mining, but they haven't really looked. And one time they did look. I've got to tell you very quickly, we get nothing out of it. But I just said to the guys, I'm looking for water over next paddock. Can you come for a little ride? And they had about 10 big trucks, and they said, how far is it? I said, about a K down the road. 72 Ks later, I got where they weren't wanting to. They said, are we still on your property? I said, yeah. And they looked at the little GPS and they said, well, it looks like we're out of our lease, so we'll put that away. And they drilled for water, but unfortunately it was 3 times salter than the sea, huge amounts, but quite intriguing. So to answer the question, yes, I believe my great-great-grandkids, if we can keep it in their hands, in your hands, your kids' hands, it will be what's underground. But at the moment, because the New South Wales government, New South Wales stands for Newcastle, Wollongong and Sydney, and they don't care what happens outside our neck of the woods, and that's a tragedy because we've got dirt roads that the Romans would want to know. Telstra doesn't work out there anymore, and a few other little variables that drive me nuts. Sorry.
Rotarians, we're out of time. I'm sure we could keep going for hours yet. Rob, that was very informative, thoroughly enjoyable, and very thought-provoking, and I think you gave us all a lot to think about. So as a small token, I'd like you to have that, what Rotary does, and please thank you.